Hey folks, today we're going to look at macro overrides. dbt has this mechanism where you can override the default behavior of some of the core macros. Now, let's kind of frame this problem first. So you can see here I've got a standard kind of incremental model here with a sync all columns set. So let's do the first build of this model, foo. Okay, so far so good. Now, imagine for a second you are adding a brand new column. So let's say Smith, last name, and then you're going to do a subsequent incremental run of this foo model. So you can see what happened here is dbt created a temporary view, and then it detected that there's this new column called last name, and then it altered that table, adding that column, and then everything works as we expect it to. Okay, great. That's what sync all columns does, right? Now, what happens if you have, say, a column that requires quoting, right? For example, maybe you need to call this column gov ID, right? So you need to have some sort of space in between or a special character or what have you. Now, let's see what happens like this. Then we run into an error, right? So if we have a look at the reason why, you'll notice that we have done the same thing. So create temporary view, and then dbt detected that there's this new gov ID column which doesn't exist yet. So dbt went ahead and added it. But when you look at the alter statement, you will notice that there's a space here, right? So dbt did not add quotes around this column, which is why this is an invalid SQL query. Okay, so now you go over to GitHub, let's say, and you try and search, and you see, there's this kind of issue here that folks have been talking about this. And then you see folks say this, dbt is not quoting this stuff. And perhaps you even notice that there's potentially a fix in the works, right? So for example, there's this PR here. And this PR, if you kind of just have a quick browse, we can see that there's this, the change was to modify the alter relation macro and to call adapter quote in front of it, right? Now, this change has not something that's made its way through dbt properly. And because it has not, you can see this issue is still open, and that's the reason for this problem to still exist as of dbt 1.10. Okay, so we know how to fix it, right? There's kind of a suggested fix and stuff. Now, let's go ahead and try and fix it ourselves by overriding the default way that the out of the box add columns macro works, right? So let's see how we can do that. So I'm in the dbt adapters repository. I'm going to search for add columns. Let's see if we can get to that. Okay, so in the macros adapters columns.sql file, I found the macro here. Now you can see this add column, column name, data type, and so on. Now, if you see this mechanism here, so you can see alter relation at remove columns, and then there's a default here and so on. This means that you can override this functionality in your own project, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go new folder, macros, and then I'm going to say override SQL. Then I'm going to paste that whole macro, right? And then I'm going to remove this default from the start. Okay, now if you remember the suggested fix we saw here before is basically you want to call adapter quote on the column name, right? So if I look at the macro, I can see add column name. So we are missing an adapter quote. So I'm going to do exactly that, right? Same macro, except I'm changing this. And then let's see what happens now. And now we have no problems when we go back and look at the alter statement. now we notice that we are at column and quoting gov ID as we expect it to, right? So you can see that by adding a macro with the exact same name as one that comes out of the box, we have altered the way that this macro works in your dbt project, right? This is essentially the same deal as the well-known generate schema name macros. So if you are familiar with customizing schemas with the generate schema name macro, so if you look in this folder, get custom name, generate schema name, you'll notice the same pattern, right? There's this macro, generate schema name, default, generate schema name, and so on. And then, you know, if you want to override the schema generation behavior, then you would go here, and then you would come in here, and then add your own macro called generate schema name, and so on, right? So the way to modify dbt out of the box behaviors is exactly this. Try and find which macro, what is the name of the macro that you need to change, add it to your project, and then start modifying the macro, right? So this is quite useful if you find any issues and any potential pull requests that are still pending and you want to try to get that fix into your project. This is the way that I would do that. Something to keep in mind is that if you are going to kind of override this, then what will happen in the future is if the fix gets into dbt core or the dbt adapter itself, then what will happen is your code will be, you know, quite different potentially depending on what was actually merged. At that time, you want to come back in and kind of make sure that you are up to date and in sync. But, you know, in the meantime, if you're running into any problems and you want to make sure you get the fix faster than the code is merged into dbt itself, then you can come in here and override it just as I have described. Thank you.